welcome to the Speakers Practice Fortnightly Friday Forum. We have an absolutely outstanding guest and topic to open with. Hi, I'm Adrienne McLean, the founder of the Speakers Practice. I've worked in the corporate sector for about 20 years, worked as a consultant for small business for about 10 years, then became focused on developing my presentation skills. I firmly believe there are now so many really valuable and constructive ways to promote businesses by speaking that this is an essential marketing tool. Presenting to groups speaks to a number of people. Video marketing is becoming really important. Information products create extra income. Online training is a new training ground. Podcast, radio, television, webinars, hangouts, and the list goes on. The Friday Forum is for business people. I will be interviewing business professionals on all sorts of topics, finding out ideas that they can use to promote their business by speaking. The aim is that this forum will give you ideas and approaches that you can use to promote your business. Today, please welcome Phil Preston, a strategic engagement specialist. Hi, Phil.
Oh, hi, Adrian. How are you?
Good, thank you. Phil's work centres on community engagement. He helps busy people balance their work and home life and do something meaningful in their community. He helps businesses go beyond donations and volunteering and finding ways of improving their financial returns and at the same time making a positive impact on the world. This is what we call shared value, and it's the topic we'll be covering today. Phil is a former investment manager responsible for researching and analysing $40 billion worth of investment exposures and has since set up his own strategic engagement practice. He was invited to become a member of the first global practitioner network that specialises in helping businesses create shared value strategies. Phil is well known to me through the National Speakers Association, and we have shared the stage on a number of occasions. Well, Phil, let's get started. I'm just so excited to hear about your work here on shared value and this business that went from broke to top performing franchise. How did he
Yep.
do it?
Well, most people, I guess, want to know about that. And I think I'll just give you a bit of background on what shared value is first, perhaps, because it is where business is going in the future.
Great.
Um, it's sort of, if you have, typically you talk about things as version 1.0, 2.0, and 3.0. Well, we can think of community engagement from a business perspective. 1.0 is where business, donates money or goods, and that's something we're all pretty familiar with.
Yeah.
And that sort of happens after the company's earned a profit and some money's left over, and most of it probably goes to shareholders, but they'll carve out a bit and say, let's help the community. So that's what we call version 1.0. Version 2.0 is what a lot of corporations do these days, which is some form of engagement with the community. So I think you mentioned in your introduction, it might be something like volunteering,
Yeah.
or it could be or helping to sponsor a cause like the World Wildlife Fund, or something that's going to help them manage their own relationships with the community much better. Now, the only issue with that, which is the 2.0 level of engagement, is that it often doesn't add value to the business itself. So if people go off and do a volunteering day once a year, they might think that's okay on the day, but it doesn't really drive business value, which is not necessarily a problem, except that if you get a change of CEO or there's a tough economic environment, the business will sometimes say, oh, we can't afford to do that anymore, or we won't give money to these people, and they change their behaviour, so it's not very sustainable. So what's really nice is this, what we call community engagement 3.0, which is shared value, and that's where a business finds a way of adding value to its own bottom line, but at the same time doing something positive in the community.
Great.
Yeah. So as a
Wow.
maybe, shall I give you a quick example of a company doing that?
Yes. Well, that would be fantastic. The the company is actually putting into the community as well as building awareness.
That's right.
How did they
And
do it?
if they're doing something positive for the community and it's helping their business in some form, they'll keep doing it. So a good
Yeah.
example, and this works on two levels. This is all leading up to talking about this franchise that we'll get to a bit later on. But Stockland, the property developer Stockland, found that in one of its shopping centres in I think it's Brockhampton is the name of the town, isn't it, in Queensland?
Yep.
In the shopping centre, there was a bunch of kids hanging around, youths who were probably frightening little old ladies and making their shopping experience not so pleasant.
Oh dear.
Um, I'm sure we
Teenagers.
all know. Yeah, I'm sure we've all seen that. And so that was a bit of an issue for their business. Not it wasn't killing their business, but it was an issue. So what they ended up doing was offering a bunch of these kids places in a program, and the program was based on giving them animation skills to make their own movie,
Wow. Well, they'd
which
love
sounds pretty
that.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds great. So they
Yes.
pulled together the local cinema operator. They pulled together the PCYC, who worked with some of these kids as well, and a couple of other community services organisations, and they set up this program where the kids went away, made their thing, and then they had a big showcase night where they invited friends and everyone came along and watched it in the cinema, which is
Oh.
not bad, is
Oh,
it?
sounds fun. Sounds
Yeah.
fantastic. Yeah.
Well, so on one hand, it's giving young people who perhaps not that engaged in their own community something to do and becoming more engaged. So it has a
Yes.
positive social impact. Um,
Yes.
on the business side, if those people aren't hanging around scaring little old ladies, then that's good for business. That helps build revenues for the shopping centre. And that program has been so successful. They're rolling it out in a couple of other shopping centres around Australia where they've got similar issues.
Oh, well, that sounds so valuable for
Yeah,
for and it's in an area where teenagers would absolutely love being involved with the film industry and making their own videos. It sounds
that's right. Yeah,
fantastic.
I think to have guided access to that opportunity is quite valuable.
Mm,
So that's quite, I guess, from Stockland's perspective, that's quite a micro level issue, and so they'll be able to improve their business at that, I guess, level of dealing directly with a bunch of customers
yeah.
or people who were at their centres. On a much higher level, one thing they did was they've remodeled their business a little bit, and instead of thinking about themselves as a developer of properties, they think about themselves as a developer of communities.
Mm,
And what that means is if they're doing a big new land release and residential development somewhere, they might, for example, do a deal with the state government and say, look, we want to put in all these houses, we're putting in some roads and other infrastructure. We'll also put in a school, and we'll build that school and pay for it. We'll transfer that over to you in 10 years' time. So what that does is that adds, it's great because the state government is getting the school for next to no cost
yes.
in terms of the building. But what it also does from their own residential development's perspective, it increases the value of that development and therefore the prices of the houses going in there. And
All
on
right.
another front, it helps them because they're proactive in the way they engage with their community. They get a quicker approval times from government, whether it's local or state, and that's positive for their business because they've got lower financing costs if they're spending less time in the project formation stage.
Mm. Well, so it works. It works in a number of different areas.
That's right.
Yeah.
And these things often look really simple in hindsight, but actually coming up with them in foresight, they can look quite radical, these ideas. So that's the challenge.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Well, in another smaller business, a business was able to go from broke to a top franchisee in 2 years. So
that's right.
how did this happen? It sounds amazing.
Yeah. Well, have you been into a battery world store or have you seen one?
I certainly have seen one. Yes, we've got them in our greater area, not necessarily just where I live, but yes.
Yeah.
So I'm certainly
Well,
aware of the business.
Yep. So the great example here, and I've just been working with that franchise group to write this up in a decent case study, is there was a guy in Townsville who was running an auto electrical business up the road, and there's essentially what they call a bit of a what would you call it, a car accessory strip up there, or a road with all the car accessory shops on it, and there's about 11 of them. And one of them was Battery World. It sells car batteries and a range of other types of batteries and power sources. And the previous owner of the franchise went out of business for whatever reason. And this guy, Greg, up the road, who owned another business, said, "Oh, that looks interesting. I might buy into that." And he ended up, the store was closed for 4 months, but then he eventually bought into it. The issue Greg faced when he bought into that store was the fact that there was 11 people selling the same product, and it's probably fairly hard to differentiate a car battery, right?
Yeah, a bit of competition there.
Yeah, a little bit of competition. So his initial plan was going out and doing the normal media stuff, advertising and paid slots on radio or TV and whatever he chose. And he realised that wasn't really going to work. So he came up with a really good idea to help differentiate his business. And what he thought about was going into schools and putting in collection bins for household batteries. So he approached several schools and went and set up these bins where kids could bring in their, all those, God knows how many AA and AAA batteries we have these days.
Oh yes, we're just collecting them, I have to say.
Well, you can take them to a Battery World store now and dispose of them, because both in their stores and in certain parts of Australia where the franchisees have done this, they put collection bins in schools. Right. So Greg was going out there, he was talking to the schools at assemblies, he'd tell the kids all about battery recycling, why it's important, and young kids, really grab onto this and go, yeah, that makes sense, we love to help the environment, and they started bringing their batteries in. It actually cost Greg money to collect the batteries and dispose of them in an accredited or proper way.
Yeah. So
you probably say, well, that doesn't make a lot of business sense. It's good for the environment, but he's not really making any money out of this, so why is that good for him? Well, what it did was those kids sort of talked about it with their parents, and they would often come into the store and actually drop off batteries in the store if they were going past. And the increase in foot traffic that Greg got through his store as a result of that initiative was quite high. So he went from managing a store that was closed down and then a very average performer once he reopened, to becoming the best and top performing franchisee in Australia.
Wow, that's amazing feat, really.
Well, it is, and it was a pretty clever thing to do, and there's a bit of risk when you try new things, but the franchise network as a whole saw what Greg was doing, and they said, okay, this looks pretty good, we should make this available to all of our franchisees in Australia. So every Battery World franchise in Australia has to offer a minimum level of recycling, and that's the collection bin in store.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. So
now you know where to take your old batteries now.
Yes. Well, the thing is with batteries is they're very toxic, so you don't quite know what to do with them when they pile up in the garage. Yeah. So it really does solve a community issue.
That's right, and think of it from the council's perspective, that they often have to try and intercept this in normal waste streams. So, and what you're doing is he's helping to remove, as you say, potentially toxic materials from their general waste stream, so there's a social benefit there from the local community through that, I guess, lower costs on the council.
So, Greg did exceptionally well to actually come up with this idea. And how did he promote this? By speaking? It's the next.
Yeah, that's a good point. He did quite a bit of speaking to help push this through, and I think there's 3 levels he was speaking on. One was going up to the schools and talking at assembly, and bear in mind this is sometimes primary schools.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know about you, Adrian. Have you ever spoken at a primary school assembly?
I haven't. No,
You haven't.
I
Well,
haven't
I've done
done
it
that.
once. I've done it once, and it was the hardest gig I've ever done in my life.
I'll have to test it out.
Yeah, yeah.
I hope they didn't throw anything.
No, they didn't throw anything at me, but I'm sure Greg obviously had them all enchanted with his spiel because he did a great job.
Oh,
So he spoke to schools, and sorry, on top of that, he also provided the teachers with some materials so they could include, I guess, a module on battery recycling into their school curricula, which was great.
yeah.
The second level is he was going out and talking to a lot of Rotary clubs
Oh, yes.
and other civic institutions. Yeah,
Yes.
so that helps to spread the word of mouth.
Yes. Well, they're much more civilised.
Well, well, you would hope so, wouldn't you? And the third level was talking to the media, and this was a huge benefit. And I think a lot of people running their own business could take a lot from this. Was that what it did? Because Greg's initiative was a positive one, people were seeking him out, especially the mayor. Like the mayor in his area thought this was great, and therefore wanted to have his or her name all over it as well. But
Yes.
what it meant was, apart from Greg doing interviews and other media, it meant that his business was getting framed in a positive light by third parties.
Ah,
And
yes.
you cannot buy that type of marketing exposure, can you?
No, no, that's
It's,
fantastic.
it's pretty valuable.
Very valuable. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think those are the three levels: speaking at schools, speaking at Rotary and other local clubs, and also his media work.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's and yeah. So the media work was through the councils and that area.
Through a range of different sources. So there might have been local newspapers, radio, and there would be media associated with, say, the mayor's office in council.
Fantastic. Okay.
Yeah.
So how can we implement this shared value approach? How as you said earlier, that it actually is takes quite a lot of thinking through to implement. So how can we do that?
Yeah. Okay. So there's a couple of things you need to think about. One is, what are the natural assets and features of your business?
Hmm.
And in Greg's case, in his franchise, he was quite quiet on a Wednesday because a lot of four-wheel drive people in Townsville, they'd come in just after the weekend when they needed to replace something, or they'd come in just before the next weekend
Yeah.
and get something for their four-wheel drive trip. So he found on Wednesdays he was pretty quiet.
Right.
So I guess one of the assets in Greg's business was the fact that there was this quieter time on Wednesday, and he thought I could be making use of that time. And
Right.
that's the type of asset you don't see on a balance sheet. So the question is, how do you understand what those assets are in your business? So
Hmm.
that's the first thing you've got to think about.
Right.
The second thing you need to think about is what are your current business issues and opportunities?
Yeah.
And in Greg's case, he was finding it hard to differentiate himself from his opposition. So he focused on the environmental or recycling theme as a way of
Hmm.
potentially doing that. And then the third thing is, well, how do you bring those two things together in a way that does address a social issue in your area? And so really that's where some of the, I guess, creativity and brainstorming is required to figure out how you bring it together. I think for anyone listening who's involved in a business or running their own business and who might already have contact points with the community, a good little graph to draw is just doing like an XY axis, and on the x-axis just write business value or dollars. That might be easier just to write dollars,
Hmm.
and on the y-axis write social benefit, and then think about your current engagement points and figure out where they sit on that chart. Do they have a lot of social benefit or a little? Do they have a lot of value to your business or a little? And just figure out what that chart looks like. So you get a view of your existing initiatives, and then
Yes.
you might see some gaps and say where you really want to be is in that top right-hand quadrant, the high
Yeah.
business value, high social value area.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, and so
So.
that process, and we can provide, or we can send on a paper to people if they want a bit more structure around how they can do this or think about it. We've got a full pager that we'll send on afterwards.
Oh, that'd be fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. So, yeah. So, yes, it's a matter of looking at the value to the business and actually the value to the community.
That's right,
Yeah.
and I think it's fair to say a lot of businesses, because they're in that community engagement 2.0 zone, they're thinking more about how do they just keep community interests happy, and they probably have low business value, but sometimes medium to high social value. And
Yes.
there's nothing wrong with that. You might end up with a range of different activities, but you should be thinking about how can you make a leap into that top right-hand quadrant or zone.
Yes. Well, yeah. I volunteer in for a community group doing interview skills, and it's possibly something that could be worked on in a broader sense. So,
That's
yeah.
right, and some of those things have spin-off benefits. But one example of mine is I've done some pro bono or free advisory work for some local community services organisations in Wollongong, and I did that fairly early on in my practitioner career because I wanted I wanted to help out, but B, it was going to help me develop the delivery of my products and help me understand that market and get to know the people in that area
Mm,
much better. So there was a dual benefit there.
yes. So it is creating awareness of the business approach, isn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Okay.
it makes it can become a reinforcing. It can be very powerful because if it's a win-win thing, and that's often something that's cliched and used a lot, but if you can make it a true win-win, then it will keep happening.
Yes.
And when you in a business, if you get a change of CEO or something else happens, you don't necessarily say, "Oh, well, let's stop doing that now because it's not core to us." Now, in Greg's case, you can see that that program is core to his business.
Oh,
He's not going to stop doing it in a hurry
no.
because it is part of his everyday business practice now.
Yes. Yeah, and a very valuable one too.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Phil, what's your advice about promoting your business by speaking? Uh, Greg's used it. How have you used this area of promotion?
I think it can be the difference between look if as you know if Greg hadn't been prepared to go out and talk to schools or media or Rotary clubs, it just wouldn't have happened. So it can be the
Yes.
difference between average or poor performance and an outstanding performance. So
Yeah.
I think we can observe what he's done and see the value in speaking. And
Yeah.
in my local community, there's a great network of I guess of young mothers who have careers but are currently sort of bringing up young children, and they've all
Yes.
got together. But I've noted a couple of them are exceptional business people, but they're very a couple are just very scared to get up and speak to a crowd. So I just think, what could they do if they had that extra skill? It would really give a lot of impact to their business
It
as
would
well.
really help them. Yes. Well,
Yeah,
Phil, here's the details. This is your article that you were speaking about, demystifying shared value and its benefits. If anyone would like this article, then please just give me an email, send me an email, and I'll be happy to forward this on to you. And you can see Phil at his website on www.philpreston.co. Well,
that's right.
Phil, thank you so much for your time today. It's been absolutely amazing to hear what area you're working in and also the benefits of this concept of shared value. It's just absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much. And
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
it's a pleasure. Then, just to finish, next week we're going to be speaking about how to reduce those nerves when speaking with Julie McDonald, who's a stress management specialist. So, I'll look forward to forwarding that on to our our listeners as well. So thanks again, Phil, and hope to see you all next week. Okay, bye for now.